to Intro Psychology Unit 10, the unit in which we're going to discuss all things motivation and emotion. And although motivation and emotion may seem like two very different ideas to have in the same unit, I hope by the end you'll appreciate how they often overlap in our everyday. So we're going to start off talking more about the motivation side of things and then weave our way more into the emotional side of things as we go. We're going to start off by talking about some broad theories of motivation and then talking about more specific applications of motivation. So to start off, we're going to talk about a couple broad theories known as the theory of instinct and the theory of drive. The theory of instinct is a theory derived from Charles Darwin and natural selection and survival of the fittest. And it's the idea that in many animals there are innate instincts. These instincts are complex behaviors that don't require training or learning. We seem to be born with them hardwired into us. These are things that we see in non-vertebrates, like a spider's ability to weave a web or bees working together to make a complex hive. We can also see this in lots of vertebrate species, of course, and the instincts get even more complex, such as how a newborn chick will often imprint onto its mom and follow its mom and do everything, and how birds learn how to fly in a V shape, and how they learn to navigate and migrate with the seasons. So in humans, we also experience a variety of very complex innate instincts. And so the theory of instinct is the idea that the reason why many people do what they do and have the inclinations they have is because it's hardwired into us. And it's hardwired into us because of evolutionary reasons to allow and support the survival of our species. That everything we do would ultimately support the survival and reproduction of the human species. Now, this theory is great and all, but it is limited. And some of the big limitations are the fact that it doesn't account for individual differences. We know that in psychology, there's a lot of diversity in the human experience, and there's lots of people that have some inclinations that others don't. So it doesn't help us to explain that part of motivation. It also doesn't help us to account for cultural differences, why there might be very complex behaviors that play out in some cultures but not others. So because of this, the theory of instinct is a great spot to start, but it's not where we tend to hang our hat in modern psychology. A slightly more modern theory is the theory of drive. So the theory of drive relies on the biological concept of homeostasis. Homeostasis can be broken down into sort of same status. And so the same status is this assumption that our body wants to keep everything the same and everything in balance. And so our body is constantly trying to make sure that we're never too full or too hungry, or too awake or too sleepy, or too hot or too cold, or that our heart isn't going too fast or too slow. Homeostasis is sort of like a Goldilocks principle. It wants to keep us in the medium zone of lots of different physical and biological attributes. So it wants to keep our blood pressure not too high, not too low, our cholesterol not too high, not too low, all things in a nice, stable, medium range. And so to do this, we have to constantly pay attention to how things like our blood sugar and our heart rate may fluctuate during the day, and our body will constantly try and counteract these things to stabilize our biological systems. And so because of this, our body is very much aware of what we call deficits. So a deficit is when one thing becomes no longer in balance. Perhaps we are needing more food and we're very hungry, or perhaps we haven't had sleep in a long time and now we're getting very sleepy. And so this theory of motivation says that as soon as we notice a significant deficit that reaches a threshold, and the threshold is the point where now the deficit is so big, our brain becomes aware of it. Now we're saying, oh, I'm hungry, or oh, I'm tired, or oh, I'm really stressed out and I need to go relax. And so once the deficit gets so big that it meets our threshold for change, we start to become motivated to take action to decrease that deficit. What's really interesting about this theory of motivation is with the theory of drive, it's the idea that when our deficits are increasing as we're becoming stressed or tired or hungry, we don't like that. We tend to feel agitated or tense or hangry. But when these deficits are being repaired, and when we're now what's sometimes called decreasing tensions is another way to think about refueling and compensating for that deficit. When we're decreasing tensions such as eating or sleeping or relaxing, we experience happiness and we experience joy and pleasure. Let me explain. Let's imagine you are really hungry and you sit down to eat your most favorite meal in the world. What is your favorite meal? Pretend it's right in front of you right now. Now, when you take your first bite of that favorite food, you're going to experience pleasure. The texture in your mouth, the aroma of the food, the crunch or the slurp, whatever types of flavors you admire, you're going to experience pleasure in taking that first bite. You're probably going to experience pleasure taking quite a few bites in that meal. But what's really interesting is as soon as you finish eating, the pleasure is gone. You tend to only experience the pleasure while you're actively decreasing the tension or actively addressing your deficit. Let's use another example. Imagine your bed. Perhaps you're in the same room as your bedroom right now. Can you imagine the fluffiness of your pillows and the softness of your blankets? And maybe you want to crawl right back to bed. What's really fascinating is while we crawl into bed at night and while we're enjoying sleep, sleep's very pleasurable to us. But no matter how long you sleep, whether it's 8 hours or 12 hours or what have you, as soon as you have to get up in the morning and leave your bed, you're no longer experiencing that pleasure. And that's because it's only while you're actively decreasing the tension that you experience the pleasure. So because of this can lead us sometimes to overeat because we only feel the pleasure while we're eating. Or it leads us sometimes to oversleep because we want to continue to feel that joyful emotion while we're sleeping. Now, what's really interesting about the theory of drive is it does account for individual differences. It actually states that the thresholds can be achieved at different rates for different people. For example, imagine you and a whole bunch of friends and family went out to eat, when we can go out to eat again, and you all ate at this buffet restaurant that everybody enjoyed. There was something there for everybody, and you ate until you were fully satiated. You were full. You couldn't imagine taking another bite. And let's say you all feel full right around noon, right around lunchtime. You leave the restaurant. How soon after leaving that restaurant at noon do you feel hungry again? Maybe 4 p.m., maybe 6 p.m., maybe 1 p.m. There's individual difference in how fast these deficits grow. There's individual differences in how fast one person may become hungry after being completely satiated again. So therefore, they're going to reach that threshold for their deficit faster. Some people might need to snack by 2 p.m. Some people can go until 5 p.m. before they have to eat again. And that helps us to explain the differences. Theory of drive can also explain things that are not super biological, like socialization. For instance, if you had a really good time chatting with friends, how soon after do you need to connect with people again in the future? Maybe you're an introvert and you just need to hang out with friends once a week or once every 2 weeks. Maybe you're an extrovert and it's a matter of hours after you connected with people that you're longing for more social expression. And so this helps us to explain the fact that although introverts are often considered people that don't need social interaction, they do, but their threshold and their deficit grows much slower for socialization than extroverts do. Extroverts, they receive those deficits much more rapidly and they need more continuous social interaction, versus introverts can take a longer time. The theory of drive can also help us to explain a really fascinating component of our physiology known as our arousal. So the theory of arousal is the theory that our body has different levels of wakefulness or different levels of alertness. And so it's the idea that at one level, we're pretty sleepy. Our parasympathetic nervous system is activated and we're relaxed. Our muscles are not tense. We're very much not so alert. At the very low level of arousal, we're pretty sleepy. Then we also have the opposite. At the extreme high level of arousal, this is when our heart rate is going very fast, our eyes are dilated, we're breathing very rapidly, our muscles are tensed, our jaw is clenched, and we feel panicked. We're very, very stressed out. And so these two extreme levels of arousal are known for not allowing us to be extremely productive. If you think about your productivity, you're not going to be extremely productive when you're only half awake and when you can barely keep your eyes open and you're yawning. And you're also not going to be very productive when you are so preoccupied with your panic and with your stress, your head is not going to be in the game. Rather, we find that most people achieve the best and succeed the most when they're in a Goldilocks zone, a medium level of arousal. And so this allows us to be alert, but not panicked. This is the idea that you can focus and you can strategize and you can problem solve, but you're not overthinking or hyperventilating. And so this theory of arousal lets us understand that the output, which would be on the vertical axis on this graph, our ability to achieve is increased when we are at the target level of arousal. Now, it's important to understand that this could play out for lots of different tasks. We could talk about your driving ability, or your cognitive ability to study, or your social skills would be best at this target level. But there's also individual differences. We find that some individuals who are very, very outgoing and very extroverted, they tend to be more hardwired to be near the more sleepy side of the curve. Just naturally, they seem to be understimulated. And so because of this, in order to get them up to the target level of arousal, people who are extroverts need more stimulation in their environment. They need more bright lights, or they need to study with music, or they need lots of fast moving things and people around them and lots of dynamic stuff happening. So someone who per se likes a really busy atmosphere. We also find that extreme introverts tend to be hardwired to be on the other end of this curve, that they just tend to naturally be overstimulated. Because of this, introverts really tend to thrive when we give them less stimulation, when they're able to study with the lights dim, or lots of quietness, or not a lot of activity or movement, and not a lot of social interaction, allows them to bring their level of arousal down to that target zone. So this may be why extroverts prefer to study with lots of loud music and in a very busy place, versus introverts like to study in absolute quiet. And this may help us to understand that through changing your study habits or turning the lights on or off can actually change your level of cognitive focus on your tasks. So the theory of arousal has been known to be really good, and we still apply it to lots of things that we have in psychology today. That being said, there is some problems with the theory of drive and the theory of arousal. Overall, we find both of these theories to be a little bit too biological. And what we mean by here is we want to acknowledge there's a lot of biological determination going on in these theories, saying when you feel hungry, you will eat. When you feel tired, you will sleep. We actually know this doesn't work in most cases. There's lots of people out there, for a variety of reasons, choose not to eat when they're hungry. Perhaps they're fasting, perhaps it's a religious observance, perhaps they have a lot of emotional concerns about what they're eating. We also know that for lots of reasons we don't sleep when we're tired, due to workaholic culture and modern society keeping us up all night, or just an addiction to screens. We tend to push our bodies, and sometimes we just take on social roles that make us have to avoid our biological needs. If you think about an infant puts their needs first. When they're wet or tired or hungry, they let everyone know by crying. However, the parent who's taking care of that infant often cannot put their own biological needs first. They can't sleep when they're tired. They can't necessarily relax when they want to relax. They have to put this other person forward. And so in a lot of our social roles in society, we choose to ignore our biology. So because of this, the theory of drive and theory of arousal are a great modern contribution to the study motivation, but they don't often allow us to explain the whole picture.